Hello, Peppers, and hello to YouTube. This is a surprise, isn't it? Just sprung down everyone.
Was not expecting to be on YouTube.
Yeah, the hand of God. He's been busy typing away with that single hand from God.
Excellent.
And he's got us on YouTube. Show us that hand of God. Yeah, that's it. Get up. That's it. That's the hand. Okay, and so we should just explain to people on YouTube what the hell this is. This is PEP, which does not stand for Planet Extra Podcast because we've been made to not call ourselves that by the ABC. Long story. This is the unofficial podcast that is not in any way attached to Planet America, which is a TV show on the ABC, which
in Australia,
which I co-host with John Barron, who is not this person.
No.
And this person is?
I am Dr. David Smith.
Dr. David Smith. No, Dr. David Smith. Doctor in?
Political science.
Okay, and the idea is we've got this TV show, me and John Planet America, on Wednesday nights and Friday nights, which means we just had one just now. You can see them on Facebook, ABC Planet America, or on iView. And that show is made for TV, which means it's meant to be slightly entertaining. Slightly.
Yeah.
Right. But most people who are into American politics go way past slightly entertaining. They go into obsessed.
Right, yeah.
And that's why we get the political science doctor.
So we're not here to entertain you. We're here to feed your obsession.
Exactly. There's no way this is entertaining in any way. Okay, so that's hopefully what you're looking for. If you've got any questions, you can put it in the YouTube comments or on the Facebook comments. Let's get right into it. First of all, I promised on the show, on the Friday show, I promised that we'd be talking more about police reform, because that is a bit of an issue at the moment.
Yes.
And yeah, it's something which people are obviously into. I'll start off with a poll on this particular topic from Data for Progress, where it's interesting because it actually skews by age. But people aged between 18 and 29, 41% of them said police officers can generally be trusted. 41% of 18 to 29s. 80% of those 50 or older said police could generally be trusted. So that's the first thing.
Yes.
Right? It skews very much the people who want reform skews young. Secondly, and this is a really interesting stat about black people. Now, I've brought to this table a number of times polls from black people saying they want more police. And there are plenty of polls that say that. But at the same time, there's a real ambivalence. Get this one. Out of people who feel less secure when they see police, 22% of whites feel less secure when they see police. 31% of Hispanics feel less secure when they see police. But 60% of black people feel less secure when they see police. And this actually reminds me of a quote that we played on the show, on the podcast, when you were away. We had a guest in, Melina, and I played a clip from Lisa Bender, who is a Minnesota counsellor.
Yes.
And she was getting knocked a lot for talking about the privilege of calling 911. And people were saying, oh, what an idiot. There's no privilege calling 911. And what she was referring to, she was taking it out of context. What she was referring to was the privilege of calling 911 and feeling more safe when the police turn up.
Yes.
And that is what she was referring to.
Yes.
That there are a large number of black people who feel less safe when the police turn up, and they might take their chances with a burglar, because they think, well, if the burglar doesn't have a gun, I might be better off dealing with them myself than calling the police. That's what she was referring to. But anyway, the fact is that there is a hunger for reform from what we see there. So let's go through them. But before we get into the actual numbers, the actual policies, Stat Nugget, Dr. Dave, is what
have you got?
While I was looking through this stuff, I saw a Stanford study from 2014.
Yes.
During traffic stops in Oakland, California.
Yeah.
Okay. There were 13 months of traffic stops between 2013 and 2014 that were observed. They took detail of all the traffic stops that led to no arrests over this 13-month period. Okay. And white people were handcuffed 72 times during that 13-month period. Would you care to guess how many times African Americans were handcuffed?
I don't even want to guess.
1,466 times African Americans were handcuffed without any arrests being made just at a traffic stop.
Yeah, 20 times the amount.
Yes. That kind of thing, that's a problem. That's a stat. No, good. And of part of the same study, if you're African American and you encountered a police officer, there was a 25% chance you would be handcuffed during that period, often in front of family or friends, even though you were not being arrested.
Yeah.
Okay, so...
By the way, it should also be mentioned. So we've talked before about police doing a lot of things that they really shouldn't be doing. This is part of the problem. One of the areas in which police operate where I don't think any, sane person looking at the situation from the outside agrees they should be there is when schools outsource discipline to police departments.
Yes.
And this is what happens.
They call them resource officers.
Yeah, this is what happens in cities where police have large untouchable budgets and schools have budgets that can be hacked away at will. Yes, discipline gets outsourced to police. So when you have children as young as 5 getting handcuffed by police for disciplinary infractions, this is what the term school to prison pipeline means. Yeah, very negative contact with the criminal justice system. I know there are people who believe it shouldn't even be referred to as the criminal justice system because justice often seems to have so little to do with it. But the point is that kind of contact often begins at a very, very early age, especially in places with under-resourced school boards and over-resourced police departments.
Yeah, and I feel like the reason I'm focusing on this kind of stuff is because I feel like this is where the rubber hits the road with the little stuff.
Yes.
Like people talk about shootings all the time.
Yes.
But there are, 50 shootings of unarmed people a year? Obviously 50 too many.
Yeah.
But we're talking tens of thousands of incidents per year that add up, and they are much more clear. That handcuff thing is much more clearly racist than the numbers of shootings. Like that is...
Yeah,
wow.
That's the disparity there is extraordinary. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. But anyway, now obviously the one thing which no one is talking about anymore, it didn't last long, was the defund the police push. That was.
I wouldn't say no one's talking.
Well, I'm talking
about.
I'm talking about in terms of politicians.
Oh right, yes,
yeah. Bernie Sanders has come out against it.
Yeah. Democrats have run a mile from this.
The chair of the Black Caucus describes it as the dumbest slogan ever. Quote. So they're running as far as they can from this kind of thing. And I was looking a little bit more into that. I did want to add one thing on that before we move on to what they're actually saying.
Yes.
Which is we've talked about Camden, which is the classic example people give up.
Yes,
bring up. And I just wanted to add some more information on that because I feel like we've only seen one side of the Camden story, the Camden story is it's a place where the police force was not doing a great job and they basically disbanded the police and just reconstituted it and just started again.
And the police unions, that was one of the key.
Yes. Yeah. And the homicides went down from 67 to 25. They've got a much more community policing kind of vibe.
Yeah.
But I just want to add some extra details, which we do need to take into consideration, have the full picture, which is, for a start, they more than doubled the number of police in this process and went from 175 cops to 400 cops, which cost less.
Yes.
So in terms of defunding, in terms of funding, it's less funding, but in terms of police, it's more police. Because they went from over 180 grand per cop down to into the 90s. Right, 90 grand per cop. But anyway, but they doubled the police and they created many more non-crisis interactions between residents and cops, which is something which we've talked about before as well.
Yes, that's the kind of original conception of broken windows policing. Yes,
exactly. And they did their de-escalation training. They had body cameras. They did all that kind of stuff. But they also installed a massive surveillance system.
Right.
Which we just need to be cleir about that. They had more than 100 high-tech cameras covering the entire city. They had a 10-meter patrol crane. They installed microphones all over the place to identify gunshot locations. So they added some technology as well on all that. And also, and the other thing is while they didn't experience a 38% drop in overall crime and a 40% drop in violent crime, Newark at exactly the same time experienced a 45% drop in crime and violent crime. So it's not a magic bullet. That's all I'm saying, because there's people throw it around like that. But just still positive results.
Yes.
So okay, what are they talking about? Republicans. Now, Trump did, we'll start with the Republicans in Congress. They've put forth for a bill. It's basically trying to enact what Trump said in his executive order.
Yes.
So they're basically just executing what Trump said he was going to do. And there aren't much they can do at the federal level, to be honest.
No, there's almost nothing they can do at the
It's much more at the
federal
state level.
Yes.
But one thing they can do, they didn't do, which is deal with qualified immunity. You can do that at the federal level.
Yes, and what have they done?
Nothing. Because Barr has said that I don't think you need to reduce immunity to go after the bad cops because that would result certainly in police pulling back. Yes, it would, because that's the point. The police need to pull back. That's the point, Barr. Anyway, for those who don't know what qualified immunity is, very briefly, it's just a court doctrine that the way it's evolved is if a police officer commits an act or some kind of crime which there hasn't been a precise example of before, so there's no precedent for that exact crime, they say, police are immune. No problems. See you later.
And Chaz, what did the Supreme Court say about qualified immunity this week?
They said nothing, Dr. Dave.
They said absolutely nothing.
Because there were like 8 cases.
Everyone is like celebrating the fact that LGBT people now finally, after, 100 years of campaigning, now have protection against workplace discrimination. Chaz is like, you didn't say anything about qualified immunity. But it is also a very important issue. And yeah.
There were like 8 cases they could have picked up of qualified immunity. They took none of them. It was so annoying. And just to give an example of what I'm talking about here, just this week in an appeals court, they held, this is in the appeals court, that 5 police officers shooting a homeless schizophrenic man 22 times after stopping him for walking in the street instead of the sidewalk, they decided that was not covered by qualified immunity. The appeals court decided that because the first court said it was covered by qualified immunity. That's how ridiculous qualified immunity is.
So they're not doing anything.
They're not doing that
about
but,
QI.
But what they say they're going to do is they're going to encourage chokehold bans.
Yeah, I saw this. Disincentivized chokeholds.
Yes, but do you know it's not? It's not all chokeholds. It's
not all chokeholds.
It's just because the term chokehold has a specialist meaning. It means stopping the airway.
Right.
But if you stop the carotid artery, that's a neck restraint. They're not counting that. Hey, guess who stopped the carotid artery the other week?
Who?
It was Chauvin. The George Floyd example that started all this is not covered by the chokehold ban.
So disincentivizing chokeholds, but not all chokeholds. That is Mark Zuckerberg level weak.
They would increase federal reporting requirements for use of force.
Oh, great!
There you go. They would create a database. This is okay. A database of police disciplinary records for law enforcement departments. It's important to have a database because right now there's none.
Yeah, you're a data nerd, Chaz, and
there is a problem.
Yes,
even for me, there's a problem. Even though I love the beautiful data.
Yeah.
Did you hear what I said? For law enforcement departments, not for the public.
No.
So that's a problem.
No, that's okay. So functionally useless. Okay, great.
Makes lynching a federal crime. Yeah. Probably about time.
Yes. Only been pushing for that one for 100 years as well. Yes.
Training on de-escalation tactics. Yeah, that's fair, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, half-hour webinar on,
It's not bad.
So that's how you don't shoot someone.
Implement duty to intervene policies. That is actually important. Remember we talked about this.
Yes, we did. Yes.
That until now, it's been a guideline that you should intervene when your mate is being rough as a police officer. But now you have a duty to intervene, which means if you're one of those dudes standing there watching Chauvin kneeling on someone's neck, it's actually your legal duty to push him off. Okay. And if you don't, you go to jail. I mean, they're going to jail anyway. But apart from that, you'd still go to jail. So that's a good thing. And a commission on the social status of black men and boys. Why do they even read that? Why do they waste 2 seconds reading about the commission on the social status of black men and boys? Okay, so that's not going very far. But like we said, this is not a federal thing anyway.
No, it's not.
Now, where it gets a little bit interesting is Senator Dick Durbin, his response was, what we say on the Democratic side is we cannot waste this historic moment, this singular opportunity. Let's not do something that is a token, half-hearted approach. And the reason why that's a little bit interesting is because the person who is the embodiment of the Republican reform bill is Tim Scott, their single black senator. And he definitely noticed that. He noticed that little turn of phrase about token. And I don't think it was an accident, I have to say, because if you've been looking at Tim Scott's Twitter feed for the last week, it's filled, probably not just the last week, it's filled with people calling him the token black. And so that phrase gets used a lot. Tim Scott replied, I thought his reply was pretty good actually, which was to say, which he replied to that with, "You're still wearing those kente cloths over there, Senator Durbin," which I thought was a pretty good.
That was embarrassing.
Yes.
That was so embarrassing that I took myself off Twitter for like 6 hours just so that I wouldn't have to look at any more of those photos.
What we're referring to is when the Democrats,
Utterly
when the
embarrassing.
Democrats introduced their bill, which we're going to get to, they knelt for 8 minutes 46 wearing kente cloths, which is Kenyan cloths. I'm not sure what that has to do with most African Americans, but anyway. And and it was a little bit embarrassing.
Trump's got some theories about that.
Yes. And then Tim Scott went on to say that, not surprising, the last 24 hours I've seen a lot of token, boy, and you're being used in my mentions. Let me get this straight. You don't want the person who has faced racial profiling by police, been pulled over dozens of times or been speaking out for years drafting this. And don't throw "you're the only black guy they know" at me either. There are only 2 black Democratic senators. Stop pretending there's some huge racial diversity gap in the Senate.
That's true.
He knows how to play this game.
Yeah.
Tim Scott.
That's true. The shortage of African-American senators in the 20th and 21st centuries is an absolute scandal.
On this note, by the way, I'd like to play you guys a clip because even though the Republican bill is absolute rubbish, Tim Scott has a story to tell.
Okay.
And I'll play you a minute of it. The whole clip goes for about 10 minutes. I'll link to it in our description.
In the course of 1 year, I've been stopped 7 times by law enforcement officers. Not 4, not 5, not 6, but 7 times in 1 year as an elected official. One of the times, I remember I was leaving the mall. I took a left out of the mall, and as soon as I took a left, a police officer pulled in right behind me. So that was my first left. I got to another traffic light. I took another left into a neighborhood. Police followed behind me. I took a third left onto the street that at the time led to my apartment complex. And then finally, I took a 4th left coming into my apartment complex, and then the blue lights went on. The officer approached the car and said that I did not use my turn signal on the 4th turn. Keep in mind, as you might imagine, I was paying very close attention to the law enforcement officer who followed me on 4 turns. Do you really think that somehow I forgot to use my turn signal on that 4th turn?
That is very messed up.
Yeah. And the whole speech is him detailing his experiences as a senator.
As a senator.
With being pulled over by the police over and over and over again. So even though the bill is rubbish,
yes,
I'm glad that Tim Scott's around, and I'm glad that he's around for the Republicans, and I wish there were a few more of him, but we start somewhere. Let's go to the Democrats. They got their Justice and Policing Act. They got their lovely kente cloths. Their bill would ban all neck restraints, not just chokeholds.
Yep.
So that's good. They would ban no-knock warrants. That's good.
That's important.
Yeah, that's good. That's Breonna Taylor would be happy about banning them. They would require local police departments to send data on the use of force to the federal government. That's different to just having their own system.
Yes.
So that's
and also,
good.
I mean, this gets to a problem that, so if you try to Google, how many people have been killed by the police this year, you're not actually going to be able to get a definitive answer. At the moment, there is no centralized collection of those figures. There are some voluntary...
Databases are great.
Sorry?
Databases are great.
There are some, I'm not actually questioning that. I just thought you were getting a bit overexcited about the Republican proposal. But yeah, there are like voluntary collection efforts, but yes.
Yeah, basically it's the Washington Post.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to have an actual official database.
Yes.
It creates a grant program to fund state-level use of force and police misconduct investigations. Yeah, okay. I mean, that's not massive, but yeah, that's something.
Yep.
Creates Cory Booker's national registry. He's been banging on about forever, tracking misconduct. A public registry of misconduct. That's important because one of the stats I threw around on today's show, I'll recycle it right here, 3% of Florida's full-time law enforcement officers have been sacked for misconduct and rehired somewhere else.
To be fair,
3%.
that's probably the same for every industry in Florida, but you do not want it in law enforcement.
Yes. It will limit the transfer of military equipment to local police
Good.
departments. That's a good one.
Got to get rid of that.
That's good. By the way, one thing I never told you about that is they don't even get training to deal with that military
No, of course they
equipment.
don't.
It's just,
I haven't got time for that.
yeah. Making lynching a federal crime. Everyone agrees on that.
Yeah.
Yes, progress. And would end qualified immunity for state and local law enforcement.
By the way, so there's one very strange thing about lynch law as it currently stands in the United States. So at the moment, states have their own anti-lynching laws, but some have incredibly weird definitions of what counts as lynching. So South Carolina, which is one of the states that had the worst actual record of lynching, their lynch law actually only defines it as violence in which there's more than one person victimizing a single person.
So one person can't lynch another person.
Not only can one person not lynch another person, but if there's a fight involving three people and two of them are on one side and one of them is on the other, then that counts as lynching under South Carolina law. And so this actually gets used, once again, in disciplinary procedures in high schools, and it often gets used against African Americans. Weirdly, so Kevin Garnett, who was one of the great NBA players of the last 20 years, forward first for the Minnesota Timberwolves and then for the Boston Celtics. He grew up in South Carolina, and he left in his senior year in high school after he was involved in an incident. It was some sort of schoolyard fight, which it was later determined he wasn't even involved in, but he was in the proximity between some African-American students and a white student. The African-American students were charged with lynching.
Wow.
And I think at that point they were, the family decided this is just not worth hanging around for. So he went to an academy in Chicago, was a high school star in Chicago, and then the rest is history. But yeah, when we say, yes, it's a good idea to have federal anti-lynching law, one of the reasons is because a lot of the state laws are so fucked up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, look, now the Democrat bill is better than the Republican bill, but even that is not going to solve the problems.
No.
Because like we said, these are state-based and local-based problems.
Yes.
I just want to actually flag a reform which hasn't been talked about much. This is at the local level. This is Albuquerque. It'll be interesting to see how this goes. They have put together an unarmed civilian public safety department to respond to calls involving homelessness, addiction, and mental health. Solely.
That's good.
So it's not police and social workers. It's a department made specifically to respond to 911 calls involving those areas.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the 911 calls are responding to that kind of stuff. What are you about to say?
I've got something to say when we get to the end of the police thing.
Okay, all right.
But I do think that's a good idea, yes.
Okay, all right. And there's one thing I want to raise, which I haven't heard anyone discuss anywhere. I did see an article about this. I
bet
didn't come
people
up with
have
this.
discussed it.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying in like at congressional level,
Congressional level, okay.
which is try recruiting for police from broader groups of people, because I'm thinking about the military here.
Mm-hmm.
6% of the country's population has served in the military. 19% of the police have served in the military. Policing is the third most popular job following active duty, after, in case you're interested, driving trucks and management. Dallas officers who have been deployed overseas with the military fired their weapons 3 times more than cops with no military service.
Right.
In Albuquerque, 1/3 of the fatal police shootings from January 2010 to April 2014 were from military people who became police.
Wow.
So that's something I don't hear spoken about very often.
Yeah.
But I reckon that's a factor.
I reckon it is.
Yeah. it's,
And no, I haven't heard anyone talking about that.
There you
so
go.
that doesn't mean that no one.
You heard first on PEP. I didn't invent it. I read it in an article. So someone's talking about it, but just doesn't get as much play as I think it should.
Just this is my academic instinct. Someone has always said it first.
Sure. I'm about to move off police into general racism before we move on to completely different topics. So do you want to jump in now?
Yes.
Okay,
So this week saw one of the greatest incidents in American policing history happen in New York City when 3 officers
I know
went to Shake Shack. Now, Shake Shack, for those of you unfamiliar, it's one of those wonderful American fast food franchises that we don't have in Australia, you know, like Fuddruckers or Whataburger or, you know, it's so they go to Shake Shack and 3 of them get diarrhea. The police union is immediately onto this. The Patrolmen's Benevolent Association. Remember, I mentioned last week, there's not just one police union for any force. There's like a lot of them, and a lot of them are basically just scams. This is.
Shall I read the tweet?
Yes.
Breaking hashtag when NYC police officers cannot even take meal without coming under attack. It is clear that environment in which we work has deteriorated to a critical level. We cannot afford to let our guard down for even a moment.
Right. So, yes. So 3 officers get diarrhea after a big night at Shake Shack. And what the Patrolmen's Benevolence Association immediately goes to is they were deliberately poisoned, probably by Antifa. That wasn't said, but that was implied. And they even said, because, you know, this is something that's in the forefront of everyone's mind, that bleach was the suspected poison. So that night, the New York Police Department, with the full cooperation of Shake Shack, actually does a full-blown investigation into this. And just before the break of dawn, the chief of detectives of the New York Police Department tweets that they did their investigation and determined that there was no criminal wrongdoing.
Well, I'll take it even further, Dr. Dave.
Yes.
Not only was there no criminal wrongdoing, but it cured them all of COVID. It's disinfectant, swallowed.
Now, you would think, like, if you get diarrhea after going to Shake Shack, there are probably some alternative hypotheses you should investigate first before going to, we were deliberately poisoned. Like, you're a grown man and you drank an entire thick shake. Like, that's the first.
They wouldn't be the first people at Shake Shack to have sore tummies
I know,
afterwards,
yes.
I expect.
But my favourite little detail of this, and I just remember because you mentioned, you know, calling 911.
Yeah.
The police, the chief of detectives, God, I can't remember his name, but, you know, so I'm looking at his Twitter feed.
Yeah.
His Twitter banner says, "This account is not monitored at all times. Please call 911. For him to have had to put on there to plead, "I'm not monitoring this Twitter feed at all times. Please call 911." I want to see a curated collection of the tweets that led to him putting that plea. Like, who's tweeting out their emergency?
Yeah. But by the way, I should say, for those wondering,
Yes.
to get to the bottom of the mystery of Shake Shack,
Yes.
it turned out that someone had cleaned the machine, the shake machine, directly before the police came with bleach. And clearly they hadn't washed it out properly because the police had the next shake made by that machine.
I reckon that's the face-saving story that's big. Okay, what's a story that'll make everyone look okay? This implies that Shake Shack actually cleans their equipment. And it implies that the police didn't just get diarrhea from, you know, eating fast food.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Okay.
Stat nugget.
Yes.
I'm going to add a siren to the Stat Nugget
Right.
anthem. I can't explain this, but I want to see if you can. There is no right answer here.
Yes,
It's just curious. There was Gallup put out a poll this week.
Yes.
Record low feelings of extreme pride in America. They've been measuring this since 2001.
Yes, yeah.
It's down to 42% now. Extreme pride was 52% in 2016. Was 69% in 2004.
Yep.
This is the bit which I want to ask you about. Not that bit.
Yes.
Because there's lots of reasons why Americans wouldn't feel very proud at the moment.
Yes, yeah.
But the interesting bit is last year, independents were 41% and they're now 41%. Democrats went up in the last year from 22% to 24%. Obviously, they're down because of partisan reasons, presumably.
Yep.
Here's the interesting bit. Republicans went down from 76 to 67. A big drop.
It's actually
down.
a significant drop.
And this is the weirdest bit. That level, 67%, is lower than it ever was during the Obama administration, when for Republicans, it ranged between 68% and 78%. So partisan reasons, you'd expect it to be lower during the Obama administration.
You would absolutely expect it
So
to.
what the hell is going on with the Republicans? Maybe it's just an outlier. Maybe it's just a bad poll. But if it's for real, I have no explanation for why Republicans would drop so much, 10% or 9% in the last year, to below Obama levels. Do you have any theories?
When was the poll fielded?
I'll find out for you.
I mean, because we could just be, let's just, raw facts of what's been going on in the last 3 months. Yes, there's 10% of Republicans who understand that the US has had one of the world's poorest responses to coronavirus. I can definitely see that contributing to a decline in extreme pride if that's when the survey was fielded. Democrats, they're already at basically rock bottom in terms of extreme pride. So, they're basically the same as they were before. But no, I can definitely picture just what has been happening over the last 3 months.
Yeah, I've got it open here.
I mean, this crisis
from
is
May 28th to June 4th, so it's post-coronavirus.
absolutely right. So, this is, you have no country in the world has more scientific and medical research power than the United States. No country in the world has more money than the United States. No country in the world has more industrial capacity when it comes to the, high-tech end than the United States. How is it that you have one of the world's worst coronavirus responses? I can definitely see that being a contributing factor to this.
Okay.
Yeah, I can definitely see, riots in American cities being a
Probably
contributing factor to that. Yeah.
Okay, I want to go back to talking about things not to be extremely proud about. I want to go back to racism for a second,
Yes.
and then we'll move on. I just want to add a couple of things because we've been talking about this on and off for weeks.
Yeah.
And I often go back and think about what we talk about. And
Yes.
one of the things we were talking about last week, we were talking about structural racism.
Yes.
And I was watching a clip from it's called a YouTube account. It's called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, and it's interesting. This guy's pretty clever. And anyway, he was talking about white
Does he have
privilege.
a name?
Is that?
What's his name?
Oh, jeez, I should know this. Can you find for me? I just call him that. I'm not good with names. Emmanuel.
Okay, but what was he saying?
Anyway, he was talking about white privilege.
Right.
Something completely different. But when he was talking about it, the first half of what he was saying, I thought really resonated with regards to structural racism, to describe what's going on.
Yes,
I thought this was a great description, which I thought was worth sharing with people.
If you and I were in a race, and the official at the start line, they held me back for the first 200 meters, and you had a 200-meter then head start, the only way to level out that race is to either stop you from running or put me on a golf cart and catch you up and catch myself up. Well, you see, what we've done in America is we've simply said, okay, Emmanuel, you're now free to run. And we've acted as if it's a fair race, when in all honesty, black people were held back for hundreds of years. And so if in the late 1960s we say, okay, black people, you can go now, that's not a fair race.
Probably doesn't need the backing music, but I think the concept, that's a great way of describing structural racism.
Yes, and I think going back to Ta-Nehisi Coates'
his name's Emmanuel Acho.
Okay, going back to Ta-Nehisi Coates' essay, The Case for Reparations, back in 2012, one of the points that he made very well, and when this essay was first put out, I think this was one of the first times that it got a very wide hearing in white America. It was just pointing out the lack of intergenerational wealth transfer among African Americans. And that directly goes back to slavery, followed by segregation and policies that made it almost impossible for African Americans to become homeowners for a very long time. So income gaps between white America and black America are one thing. But if you want the real story, it's the wealth gap, which is absolutely extraordinary and which is, it's something that is incredibly hard to just erase with, I say, okay, we're not going to be racist anymore.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I'd take it even further. I'd say
Yes.
there's a neighborhood gap as well, and there's an education. When I say education gap, I don't mean people not getting education. I mean they're going to different schools.
Yes, yeah.
And we'll be talking about that another time, probably next week. Actually, I think it's going to be coming up soon. There's a whole bunch of guys because, like I mentioned on the show, Hispanics are economically in a very similar position to African Americans, but they are achieving more mobility. You can see in a generation or two, they will be right next to whites.
Yes.
African Americans at the rate they are going at the moment will not be.
Yes.
Yep. And that's been persistent for generations.
Yes.
And that is what we're talking about. Anyway, so I wanted to raise that because I thought that was a great way of describing it.
It is. Yes.
And something you hear on, and it responds to something you hear on Fox News a lot, which is people saying, and look, I also think this as a libertarian type. I do think, I don't believe in equality of outcome. I believe in equality of opportunity. And that's something you hear on Fox News all the time, right? But the problem here is that it isn't equality of opportunity.
No, exactly. Yes.
That's the problem.
Yes.
And so, if you just say, okay, no more discrimination, go.
Yeah.
And you're starting at different positions of the race, that is not equality of opportunity.
Yes, if basically all you've moved is the sort of just absolutely most egregious legal obstacles, then no, you don't have anything near equality of opportunity.
And I think the sooner America as a whole acknowledges that, the better they'll be.
And I think it is important. The conversation has to remain focused on structural racism.
Yeah.
It can't be allowed to be derailed, as it constantly is, by conversations about white people's feelings. The focus has to remain structural.
Actually, on that note, one thing I wanted to bring up as well from last week was we were talking about this, and I was talking about I was saying how I think using the word racism in that context isn't helpful.
Yes.
I think using the word racism when you're dealing with a dickhead who's been racist, that's very helpful. Yes. but when you're talking about like a societal wide sort of a structural imbalance, I feel like when using the language of punishment, which is what the language of racism is, again, you racist. I don't think it helped. We were talking about, I don't think it's conducive to solutions. And we were talking about this, and you were saying maybe white supremacist, and I was going, oh, whatever, just don't use the word racism. Yeah. I was thinking about it. I think white supremacist, I don't think is a better term at all.
No, but it's descriptively accurate.
Sure. I would personally, I was actually thinking, what term would I use? I would use the word structural bias, because I think that's what it is. It is bias.
Oh, sounds a bit McKinsey to me.
Maybe, but I think it's not just bias against black people. There's bias against other people as well. I think black people have the worst bias. Yeah, but I think there are structural biases across the board, and that's what intersectionality is all about, obviously.
Yes, yeah.
But I think that Anyway, that's what I just wanted to just flag that just because I was thinking about it. And one comment I read from people because I was reading comments as well. There was a bit of two white guys talking about race. Hey. And look, that's fair enough.
It is. That's completely fair enough.
We are two white guys talking about race. And that's a big thing at the ABC, by the way. They really don't like two white guys talking about race. And I understand that. But I actually think, I was thinking about this and something that Emmanuel was saying as well in his YouTube clip, that if you've got a big problem, you want everyone to talk about it. You want, obviously you want to talk to black people and listen to black people talking about race issues, but you also want as many people talking about this as possible. Like you don't want two white guys talking about race at the exclusion of talking about black people, but in addition to it, that's a good thing. And in fact, I was actually seeing that a number of black people I was reading what they were saying, listening to them. They were saying that part of the elements of white privilege is to not have to think about race.
Absolutely, yes.
And that black people have to think about race every second of the day, and white people don't need to because they've got the cards dealt for them, and that's part of their privilege.
Yes.
And so I think us actually talking about it is a good thing.
By the way, Australia's like an extreme version of that.
Yeah, part of the issue with Australia is there's so many more white people as well.
Because the conquest of white supremacy was a lot more thorough in Australia than it was in the United States. That is the reason why. But
yeah. I want to talk about. I'll skip what I was about to talk about. Let's talk about something you brought to the table.
Yes.
Ableism and ageism, because
Yes,
we're talking about
this is going to be a completely unavoidable
this
topic.
ramp thing.
Yes. So when you have a 77-year-old candidate against a 74-year-old candidate, it's inevitable that we're going to run into these issues. And of course, so this is something that happened last weekend where Trump gives this commencement speech at West Point, walks very tentatively down this ramp afterwards.
As he's been doing for years, by the way.
Yes, yeah. And, of course, a lot of people make fun of this.
Yep.
Trump responds with a tweet saying, well, it was very slippery and it was very steep and there was no handrail. That's probably all true. But then, of course, has to throw in the bizarre Trump embellishment, like, and I ran the last 10 feet down.
He definitely did not run the last 10 feet.
Yeah, but okay. What is all of this about? Oh, and then, of course, you have video of Joe Biden, not exactly sprinting, but like jogging.
He does jog.
Yeah, jogging down a street to show off his physical prowess. Yeah. Okay. What is all of this about? It's about the fact. So I don't think that it should be a requirement to be president that you have to be able to walk down a ramp. I just don't. FDR was in a wheelchair.
I was about to bring him up.
But here's the key thing. FDR felt that he had to hide that fact from the American people.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not, physical infirmity is an election issue, one that's very rarely spoken about directly, but one that everybody knows what the power of it is.
You know what I'm about to say, don't you?
2016?
No. Greg Abbott, Texas governor.
Yeah.
Wheelchair.
Oh, right.
And he doesn't hide it.
Okay.
Yeah. But whatever. There's one exception.
Anyway.
Go on,
but that's Texas politics.
Yeah.
Right. President of the United States, you're the embodiment of the nation. And there's this deep sort of psychological thing about you can't show weakness and the people don't want you to show weakness. Now, I talked about this a little bit on Richard Glover's show on Tuesday. For those of you in New South Wales, I do a weekly segment on Richard Glover's show at 5:20 in the afternoon called Trump Tuesday.
Everyone around the world listens to this.
Which is, it's way shorter, 10 minutes long. So I can't go necessarily into the depth that I would like. But, okay, let's see. 2016 campaign, Hillary Clinton has a fainting incident.
Yes.
And Republicans just absolutely went to town.
She had pneumonia, didn't she?
Yeah. Absolutely went to town on that. There's all kinds of doctored videos of Hillary Clinton slurring and they do the same thing with Nancy Pelosi. They're clearly planning to do the same thing with Joe Biden, implying he has dementia, although I think that they might be beginning to realize that's maybe not a battlefield that they want to fight on. But whole point is Trump and his people understand the power of, physical infirmity hurts you. Perceptions of physical infirmity hurt you during an election campaign. Let's look at some classic other examples. George H.W. Bush wasn't during the election campaign, but I think the year before the election, he passes out and throws up at a banquet in Japan.
That's not
absolutely classic moment.
Was this on camera?
The lone camera in the dining room was locked in on the head table when President Bush was overcome by nausea and fell forward. It appears he lost consciousness as he toppled over onto his host, Prime Minister Miyazawa.
Gerald Ford falls down the stairs of Air Force One. That's another classic moment. And
hand to God, we're going to put all these in?
My favourite one of all, Jimmy Carter in 1979 is out on a boat relaxing in a lake somewhere in Georgia, gets into a fight with a swamp rabbit.
A swamp rabbit?
A swamp rabbit. A literal swamp rabbit.
Did he win the fight?
No.
Oh, dear.
No, he did not. No, he sort of awkwardly takes a swipe at it with his oar, misses. Swamp rabbit just swims off doing its swamp rabbit thing.
You should know not to take on a bunny.
Yeah.
Yes. They're very wily, those bunnies.
And by the way, there's a very good Wikipedia page on that incident. Yeah, Richard Cook was right. Wikipedia really is the best place on the internet. But yeah, it points out that even at the time, Carter's people tried to keep this incident quiet because they're like, this shows weakness. Yeah. But no, it did get out, and it might have actually hurt his re-election prospects, albeit there was a lot of other stuff.
There were.
So everyone that I've just mentioned lost.
Yeah.
They went on to lose. So this is why I don't think it should be an issue, but it's going to be an issue because everybody understands the way that this becomes an issue in an election campaign.
Would you suggest that it's a bigger issue for some kind of physical infirmity than for Joe Biden stumbling around like an old fool? The way he does, like as in, because basically you got a situation where the knock on Joe Biden is mental degeneration.
Yes.
The knock on Trump is going to be physical degeneration.
Yeah.
Which beats which?
Oh, good question. Because do you remember a few years ago Trump took that dementia test, which showed that he didn't have dementia, and he was like bragging about, I aced that test.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, you have to ace that test in order not to have dementia. And it had things like identify the correct animal. Like, is this a rhinoceros?
Sure.
Is this, it's kind of, it's good that he doesn't have dementia, but it's kind of not necessarily. So, Trump's problem isn't dementia. It's just, the greatest lack of self-awareness the world has ever seen.
And
I don't think Biden has dementia either.
Yeah, no, we've talked about this. I think Biden is getting slower, but his judgment is intact as far as I can see. And I don't think Trump is physically incapable either. Like I said, he spent the last at least 4 years watching when he goes downstairs, and he's always drunk with two hands. So people are making something out of it.
Holding things is a very weird experience for Trump.
Yeah. It's a strange Achilles heel holding things.
Yes.
But
anyway, that's just what I wanted to say about the role that ableism and ageism are going to play. Unfortunately, it's going to be unavoidable because both campaigns are trying to take advantage.
Yes, they are. One thing which we're not talking about today, because everyone else is enough to account for us, is John Bolton.
Yeah, I know. I don't want to talk about him.
I know. I don't want to talk about him. I really don't.
Let's not talk about him.
I'm not going to. But what I'm going to say is not about John Bolton, but about something related to John Bolton. That is, while they're talking about John Bolton, what they won't say is that all this Ukraine stuff, all this, Bolton might have contributed to Ukraine.
Yep.
The audit by Ukraine's former top prosecutor was released last week.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the audit into Hunter Biden, the one which this
show?
whole thing was about.
What did it show?
Found no evidence of illegal activity from Hunter Biden in his capacity as an energy company board member.
Oh, my God.
That didn't get much press, did it?
No.
Yes, but there you go. So that was.
Well, thanks for that. When you said it's something to do with John Bolton, I thought you were going to announce you were growing a moustache.
I don't have the years left in my life to grow a moustache that lush.
No.
but bear in mind that this whole impeachment thing was all about trying to get this audit, trying to get this investigation.
Wow.
They got the investigation.
I didn't realize they were actually doing it.
Yeah, they did. They announced during the impeachment they were going to do the investigation. And the result came out and it's butkus.
I did not know that.
And while we're at it, talking about things that haven't gotten any coverage whatsoever, this is one that just got my goat. The EPA released newer air pollution standards this week. It says there's no need to tighten pollution controls. Yay, that's great. No need to tighten pollution controls. Dr. Dave, can you see where this is going?
I think absolutely see where this is going.
Great news, Dr. Dave. One problem.
What's that, Chaz?
The EPA's Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee, they review the standards, but they have no expertise. So they tend to outsource to a panel of outside scientists. That panel was constituted in 2015 to undergo this task. Guess what happened to them? In 2018, to streamline the review process, they were sacked.
And replaced with Jared Kushner.
No, not quite that bad. But it went back to CASAC, who the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee, who had no expertise. And by now, they were packed with Trump hacks.
Yes.
It was chaired by an industry consultant. Out of the 7 members, there was 1 scientist. And they decided there's no need to tighten pollution controls, Dr. Dave. That's their result. Meanwhile, the original group just kept on meeting anyway, even though they were sacked.
Yeah.
And they put out unofficial recommendations that would have been official recommendations had they not been sacked. Turns out they say that fine particles need to be reduced from 12 micrograms per cubic meter to between 10 and 8. And they said even at 8, that's not reducing the risk to zero. Turns out that for those fine particles, those in poverty have 1.35 times higher burdens of air pollution than the overall population. And black people specifically have 1.54 times higher burdens than the overall population. But they don't need to worry because the hacks say there's no need to tighten pollution controls. So there you go. That is going to go to court for sure, and they will lose for sure,
Yes.
like the Trump administration always does when they try and cut corners like this.
Yep.
I cited a stat on the show today. I'll cite it again. They've won 6 cases out of 85 as far as administrative tribunal cases go because they always cut corners.
Yes.
That's another example right there.
That is a terrible example.
Yeah. Dr. Dave, let's get into 2020.
Yes.
You've been doing a bit of investigation into polling.
Yes. Now, so we're beginning to approach the stage where polls are going to start getting a lot more frequent. Right. So I know our sort of hardcore contingent of peppers, a lot of you are going to be really, really into polls. And so what I'm about to say, I'm sure a lot of you already know, but I would recommend we're going to post this. 538's got a couple of quite useful guides about how to read polls and how to read poll aggregation as well. Really, there are 2 main players in the game of poll aggregation. It's 538 and Real Clear Politics. They're both good for what they do, as long as you understand exactly what they're doing. Nate Silver breaks down the difference between their methodologies very well. So if you are going to start obsessively following polls, I really advise you to have a look at that. One thing, though, that I do want to mention is I saw a very worrying tweet this week from Natalie Jackson, who works for PRRI, which is a left-leaning polling firm. And the context of this is, so because a lot of state-level polls got it wrong in 2016, especially in the Midwest, like national polls were actually fairly close. Yes. State-level polls were the ones who tended to get it so wrong that it really interfered.
Wisconsin in particular was the worst ever.
Yeah. There was a massive autopsy about this conducted by the American Association for Public Opinion Research, APOR, which is an excellent organisation. There were all of these recommendations made. The pollsters who had got closer, there was a lot of looking at, what had they done that others hadn't done. And so, when all this was happening, I was feeling very hopeful, like, okay, the polls are going to be a lot better this time around. Natalie Jackson said, no, from what I'm seeing methodologically, the polls are worse. Actually worse, just in terms of the basic data gathering. Now, this particularly applies to state-level polls often being conducted by local firms, because we're beginning to see more and more of this. Like I saw an Arkansas one this week that had Biden and Trump in a statistical dead heat in Arkansas.
Yes.
And had Tom Cotton underwater in terms of his job disapproval. Tom Cotton, though, is not facing a Democratic opponent this time around. He's facing a Libertarian, and we all know that they don't win.
No, they never win.
So he's got nothing to win. But this was fairly shocking to see this in Arkansas. Maybe this does indicate the kind of depth of the hole that Republicans are in. But Natalie Jackson was pointing out all these kinds of methodological problems. For example, she's saying in states where 57% of the state is only on mobile phones, only 40% of the sample is mobile phones. Or it's just polls not really reporting what they did, just saying internet sample or some mix of MTurk and something else. So this is important because where there is not a huge amount of state polling, and if you look through Real Clear Politics, you can see these dramatic sort of leads for Biden in state polls, but you look at the polls and you're like, oh, okay, the last one was done a while ago and only had a sample of 400 or something like that. You really can get accumulated misleading impressions. Now, one of the reasons I'm saying this is, at the moment, according to 538, Trump's approval rating seems to have stopped falling, right? It seems to have plateaued around 41%. But that gap, both 538 and Real Clear Politics, between Trump and Biden seems to keep widening. So Real Clear Politics has it at 8.5%. 538's got it at 9.1%. Under normal circumstances, you would say Trump is absolutely cooked. But of course, we've all got the ghosts of 2016 weighing very, very heavily on us. When there were times in 2016, a long way out, when there were kinds of similar leads to Hillary Clinton. But one of the alarming things is that they're potentially the same problems at the state polls could actually be repeated.
Yeah.
Another quick thing that I want to say about sort of polls and forecasting towards 2020 is looking at this extraordinary slate of Supreme Court decisions this week. Now, first of all, the LGBT rights in the workplace, that's just an incredibly seminal ruling. Like, I would regard that as more important than Obergefell versus Hodges.
Oh, definitely.
Because workplace discrimination has just been at the heart of the gay rights movement for decades. During the Red Scare, when, thousands of public service employees were being sacked for being suspected communists, there was also what was referred to as the Lavender Scare, where tens of thousands of public servants were sacked, were sacked because of their private lives or because of suspicions about their private lives. It was extraordinary, given a lot of the progress that was made in gay rights, the fact that this level of workplace discrimination was still allowed. So this is an incredibly important ruling.
Yeah, let's keep on going Supreme Court, shall we?
Yeah, yes.
Or do you want to finish your point before?
I just wanted to point out very, very important substantive. But yeah, point out some of the other major cases this week.
Yeah, okay, I'll get into them, but I just want to talk a bit more about the gay transgender case before I do that. I agree with you completely. That was a massive deal. And it's not just because of the immediate repercussions either, because 21 states already cover both homosexual and transgender discrimination categories. 91% of Fortune 500 companies already self-regulate against discrimination based on both of them. 91% was sexual orientation, 83% was gender identity. But the issue is where it's going from here, because the logic used by Neil Gorsuch in his majority ruling basically means any time that the words sexual discrimination are used in the law, you can now apply that to same-sex discrimination and transgender discrimination.
Yes.
Like his logic was by the nature of transgender discrimination or same-sex discrimination, you must consider their sex.
Yes, which meant that the Trump administration did last week in terms of rolling back
is now unconstitutional.
Gender health protections for transgender people. That's also unconstitutional. Yeah. And okay, then there's this slew of other things that happened in the Supreme Court. Today, we have on procedural grounds, Trump is not allowed to halt DACA, which is the program that provides a pathway for citizenship for children who were brought to the United States illegally, but have since essentially become American. It refused to hear, I think it was 10 gun rights cases. And that's a big deal because they haven't heard a guns case for ages. And you've got to a position now where in a lot of blue states, they're effectively outlawing guns. Yes.
Like they make it really, really hard for you to get guns. And Clarence Thomas has been having a kitten going, let's listen to some of these, let's hear some of these cases so we can bring the Second Amendment back.
Only two of them wanted to hear it, but
And there is some speculation from conservatives, I should say, that the reason that they keep on, because they've got 5 conservatives there. And you only need 4 to hear a case. But they can't get 4 conservatives to agree to hear a case. Now, some people say they're just waiting for the right case. But some people say the conservatives on the court don't trust John Roberts and think if they bring a guns case, he's going to rule the other way.
There could be something to that. We'll come back to guns in just a second, but something I just want to say about this is, okay, so most of these rulings are going in one direction. There are rulings next week which might go in the opposite direction, especially around abortion restrictions, Trump's tax returns, things like that. But this was a big week of conservative defeats. Now,
I'll tell you one more before you go on, just so we put them all together. Sanctuary cities as well.
Absolutely.
In California, they've basically, the Supreme Court has basically said, sanctuary cities, no problems. And Trump does not like to hear that
Sanctuary cities are when cities have laws against law enforcement sharing information with immigration agencies. That's right. That, by the way, is good law enforcement practice because it actually encourages people to cooperate with law enforcement.
Yes, but go on with what you're going to say.
So what are the electoral implications of this, right? Because we have talked on the podcast before about how important the Supreme Court is in presidential elections. To the extent Supreme Court appointments are often seen as the most important thing the president actually does. Sometimes the only lasting thing that they actually do. The fact that there was an open Supreme Court seat was incredibly important to Trump in the 2016 election campaign. Trump should be kissing a photo of Mitch McConnell before he goes to sleep every night, but I bet he's not because he's ungrateful.
Actually, before you tell us the electoral implications, let me just go back for a second on this gay thing because I want to build up just how big a deal this is for conservatives. So people understand. I want to read you Alito's. He was the chief dissenter. I want to read you his primal scream, word for word, in his dissent, because he was not happy. This is what he had to say to Judge Gorsuch. There is only one word for what the court has done today: legislation.
Oh, the dirtiest word in the English language.
The document that the court releases is in the form of a judicial opinion interpreting a statute, but that is deceptive. Civil Rights Act prohibits employment discrimination on any of 5 specified grounds: race, colour, religion, sex, and national origin. Neither sexual orientation nor gender identity appears on that list. For the past 45 years, bills have been introduced in Congress to add sexual orientation to that list, and in recent years, bills have included gender identity as well. But to date, none has passed both houses because no such amendment of Title VII has been enacted in accordance with the requirements of the Constitution. Title VII's prohibition of discrimination because of sex still means what it has always meant. But the court is not deterred by these constitutional niceties, usurping the constitutional authority.
That's one of the favourite Federalist Society phrasings.
Yes, it is. Yes. Usurping the constitutional authority of the other branches, the court has essentially taken the Congress's provision on employment discrimination and issued it under the guise of statutory interpretation. A more brazen abuse of our authority to interpret statutes is hard to recall. The court attempts to pass off its decision as the inevitable product of the textualist school of statutory interpretation championed by our late colleague Justice Scalia, but no one should be fooled. The court's opinion is like a pirate ship. It sails under a textualist flag, but what it actually represents is a theory of statutory interpretation that Justice Scalia excoriated. The theory that courts should update old statutes so that they better reflect the current values of society. If the court finds it appropriate to adopt this theory, it should own up to what it's doing. Many will applaud today's decision because they agree on policy grounds with the court's updating of Title VII. But the question in these cases is not whether discrimination because of sexual orientation or gender identity should be outlawed. The question is whether Congress did that in 1964. It indisputably did not.
Okay, so the great historical irony is the reason the word sex is in there at all was because a segregationist senator wanted to try to sink the legislation by putting the word sex in there, hoping that other people would vote against it. By the way, also, Gorsuch has now got a theme song for life, which is Let's Talk About Sex, Baby, which is exactly what he did in that ruling.
Yeah.
Electorally.
I'm not there yet. Almost there. Just hold on. We're building, okay? Josh Hawley, who is everyone's favourite demagogue when it comes to Christian issues, he jumped on this and he said the conservative legal project has failed. It represents the end of the conservative legal movement or the conservative legal project as we know it. After Bostock, that's this case, the effort as we know it and it has existed up to now is over. That was his speech. So now I've made this shorter. I could have kept on going. But so now my point is, this is as big as it can get for conservatives.
Absolutely, yes. And the right to discriminate in private business is just one of the things they really believe in.
And the guy who brought it to them was Gorsuch, who was Trump's selection.
Yes.
He was the one.
First cab off the rank.
He was the one that
Absolute golden boy.
All the pussy grabbing. They
son of a former Reagan administration official.
They bit their tongue during the pussy grabbing things. They thought, we're going to get a judge. And they got the judge, and the judge has just stabbed them in the heart with this ruling.
A beautiful thing to behold.
Now, tell us about it.
Electoral implications. Yes. You've got to immediately think about this because how many conservatives at this point are thinking, what is the fucking point?
Yeah.
Right. You know, we elect Trump. We don't really like him, but we elect him so that he'll give us a conservative Supreme Court. First guy he picks turns out to be this Episcopalian who thinks that sex refers to something other than what it referred to in 1964. So, okay, I can see a couple of ways that this can go. I can actually see a few conservatives going with exactly that reasoning and sitting this out. I'm not saying it's a lot. But if it's like 5%,
It doesn't need to be many.
religious conservatives, that's Trump
Yeah.
sunk. You know, Trump basically needs that 80% of white evangelical Christians back in his corner. He loses 5 or 10% of them, it's done. I don't think he'll lose that much more than that because for most of them, there's a far more sort of visceral identification with Trump rather than this sort of abstract commitment to conservative ideals. But for some of them, that will be the case. Now, when Trump heard about the case and when he was asked about it, I maintain I don't think he actually understood what had happened. Because,
I don't think so either. Do you want me to read it to you?
Yeah.
Yep. He said, they've ruled. I've read the decision and some people were surprised, but they've ruled and we live with their decision.
On its face, that's the single best statement of his presidency,
It's
which
awesome.
makes me think he doesn't actually know what was going on at the time when he had not thought through the implications for him about that. Because then today, he's way more combative. He's talking about all of these liberal Supreme Court decisions are like a shotgun blast to the face of conservatives. His exact language. And then, of course, he comes back. Whenever he has a setback in any area, what does he always tell his supporters? They're coming after your Second Amendment.
Yes.
Like, that's what he always goes back to, which is really alarming from the perspective of how are his supporters going to respond if they lose. Now, in the same way he constantly, plagiarizes Nixon fairly obviously, I think he's self-consciously taking a leaf out of the book of George W. Bush, who eked out his electoral college victory in 2000, partly because this was when some aspects of the Brady bill and the semi-automatic weapons ban were due to expire. And Bush just went to all of these traditionally blue states, which got flipped red in that election, like West Virginia, went to West Virginia 15 times, had relentlessly the same message every time, which is they are coming after your guns. Right? So this is another thing Trump clearly believes will work. This is what is going to rile people up the most. First of all, they're religiously persecuting. Second, they're coming after your guns. I'm not sure if that's as powerful as it was in 2000. The gun rights movement politically is in absolute disarray at the moment. The NRA is in total. The NRA is at war with itself, with its media empire. The number of gun owners in America is declining.
And you know who doesn't like guns? Suburban women.
Exactly.
In North Carolina in Georgia.
This is the disturbing trend in America. Ever since the end of World War II, the number of households who own guns has been declining, but the number of guns has been going up, right? So you've got more and more guns concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer people. This is one of the things I find so utterly frightening about the gun lobby. It's who it represents. It's people with massive arsenals. And these are the people that Trump's really talking to at the moment. So, okay, but what Trump's basically saying to them is, no, the solution is you need to elect me again so I can appoint more conservative justices.
Yes.
Right? Because at the moment, he hasn't actually changed the balance of the court. It's still 5-4, as it has been since the probably since the Clinton administration.
The conservatives have controlled the Supreme Court since the 70s.
Right. Yes. Has it always been that 5-4 balance?
I'm not sure it's always 5-4. Sometimes it might be 6-3, but conservatives have liberals have not controlled it since Nixon.
Anyway, in the next term, we are likely to see the retirements of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Clarence Thomas because they are both just getting extremely old at this point. Yes. So there's a chance, one way or the other, there's a real chance to actually dramatically change the balance to turn it 6-3 conservative or 5-4 liberal. And so maybe there'll be an opposite effect. Maybe some conservatives will be more motivated because they're like, well, if with a 5-4 majority we can't get what we want, maybe we can get it with 6-3, but 5-4 liberal majority we're going to lose everything.
I don't think 5-4's on the cards because the oldest conservative is Clarence Thomas and he's like 71. He'll hang around.
No, he's older than that. No, and there's speculation. No, there is actually speculation that Thomas will retire. By the way, I mentioned this last year when we did this version of this that was on Facebook. Corey Robbins' book about Clarence Thomas, whose title I can't remember. That was my favourite American politics book of last year.
Okay.
We'll
try and find it.
Highly recommend
Put it on the book list.
Yes.
This bloody thing isn't loading. 71. Yeah.
Okay.
Woo! I enjoyed that.
We
too
haven't
much.
got that long left.
No, we don't. We don't. Okay, I want to talk about one. Sorry, is there something you want to squeeze in quickly?
In response to a reader request, I am
all right.
at some point, but I think we might leave that till next week because that's
Okay,
going to take a solid 10 minutes or so to
we'll tease it.
explain how the Republican Party went from being the party of racial liberalism to the party of racial conservatism.
Okay.
Because last week I talked about how the Democrats went in the opposite direction. The other side of that, which is a fascinating story, is the story of the Republican Party. But we'll leave that till next
The
week.
saying I was squeezing is it'll take pretty much 5 minutes. So that's okay because I teased it on the show as well. The International Criminal Court was formed in 2002. The US is not a signatory.
I remember it was so many debating topics about the International Criminal Court. Yes.
Yeah, the US was behind the formation of it, but that was under Clinton. But then by the time it was actually formed, it was Bush there. He didn't want to be a signatory to it because of things that were going on in Iraq at that point in time. And so they're not a signatory. But anyway, Afghanistan is a signatory, and they asked the court to look into allegations of war crimes from the US troops. Turns out the court found enough information to prove, they say, that US forces had committed acts of torture, cruel treatment, outrages upon personal dignity, rape and sexual violence against conflict-related detainees in Afghanistan and other locations like in 2003 to 2004 and dark zones, CIA facilities in Poland, etc. You won't be surprised to hear that. We kind of know that already. Now, this is tough for Trump because this is a legitimate body conducting a properly, duly authorized investigation, right? But on the other hand, he can just get rid of it because the Rome Statute, which was formed by the ICC, makes clear it will not investigate or prosecute when national governments have held themselves and their soldiers accountable. He just needs to investigate himself. Or that's all he has to do.
Get Jared to do it.
Yeah, that's all he has to do.
Yeah.
So how did he respond? How the Trump administration responded was by declaring that it, quote, constitutes an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States, and I hereby declare a national emergency.
I hereby declare his favourite word.
A national emergency to deal with that threat. There's COVID, there's riots, there's the worst economy since the Depression, but this is the national emergency. That's human rights lawyers are investigating the torture that we all know existed. Okay. According to the administration, the court has the power to impede the critical national security and foreign policy work of United States government, allied officials, and thereby threaten national security of the United States. Okay, so how they deal with this? He just passed an executive order, which I just quoted some of, which, quote, authorizes economic sanctions and travel restrictions against court workers directly involved in investigating American troops and for possible war crimes in Afghanistan. So they're blocking their financial assets and they're stopping them coming to America. But wait, there's more. It's not just them. Quote, it may include ICC officials, employees and agents, as well as their immediate family members.
Wow.
They are putting sanctions on the family members of human rights lawyers. Jesus. That is what they are doing.
Whoa, that is fucked up.
That is worse than the sanctions against terrorists from 2019. They don't impose sanctions on their family members, right? But these guys don't have assets, so because they're human rights lawyers, so they don't really give a stuff. So it's not going to stop them. But this could lead to undermining America's whole sanctions regime, because the more you cry wolf with this stuff, the more people try and find ways around it. And then all of a sudden, no sanctions work at all because there's ways around them, right? So it's kind of short-sighted as well. I should also throw out there that Pompeo is also suggested there might be about Israel as well, because they're also investigating Israel's war crimes during the 2014 Gaza war. So there's that element as well. But basically, they are sanctioning human rights lawyers worse than terrorists, and I can't believe it. And this is also...
You can't believe it?
This is also,
you seriously can't believe
it? They could ignore them. They could just ignore them. What are they doing? And this has also gotten scandalously little media coverage as well. Yeah, so I just want to throw that out there. That was all I had to say. We got 2 minutes left. Is there anything else you want to say, Dave? Dr. Dave?
No.
No? Okay, I'll leave everything else. We'll talk about what you flagged next week. I'll talk about packing the court and a bunch of other things next week as well, and probably more Josh Hawley, let's face it. Thank you very much, Peppers. Thank you very much, YouTube.
It was great to start this podcast without Pepperbox.
Do we bring it back?
No, we don't bring it back.
YouTubers, you can go straight to Pepperbox yourself. For everyone else, thanks a lot. See you guys
Have a good
next
weekend.
week. Bye-bye.
Bye.